On the edge of town, in a small house with peeling paint on the facade and an old iron fence, Maritza Escalante wiped a plastic table in the yard with a damp cloth. Her tanned hands moved mechanically. She did this every evening after work. A simple dinner was ready and waiting in the kitchen, covered with a towel. Maritza fixed a loose strand of dark hair and looked at her watch. Her husband would be back from the construction site any minute. The yard was small, but Maritza did her best to keep it tidy. A few pots of red geraniums stood along the wall of the house, and in the corner was an old lemon bush that she and Raúl had planted the first year they were married. The bush was long gone, but Maritza was hesitant to uproot it, too many memories associated with it. The creak of the gate announced Raúl's return. He entered the courtyard dragging his feet tiredly, with his work bag over his shoulder. His once slender figure now seemed a little slouching after years of working on the construction site. His gray work clothes were flecked with cement dust. "Rough day?" Maritza asked, looking at her husband with her usual mixture of concern and worry. Something had subtly changed in their relationship over the past year, as if an invisible wall had grown between them. "Same as always," Raúl shrugged, sinking into a plastic chair. "The foreman is demanding a faster pace, but he's not going to pay any more." Maritza silently brought a plate of enchiladas and a glass of water from the kitchen. She knew talking about money was always a painful conversation. Their family budget barely allowed them to make ends meet, even though they both worked. "Maybe we should think about moving to the capital," Maritza suggested cautiously, taking a seat across from her husband. "There are more opportunities there, better pay." Raúl looked up from his plate. In the dim light of the lamp hanging over the table, his face seemed especially tired. "And leave home. Mom will never understand that." Maritza suppressed a sigh. Dolores, her mother-in-law, had always been a stumbling block in their relationship. The domineering woman felt it was her duty to control her only son's life even after he was married. "Raúl, we can't live forever, looking back at your mother," Maritza tried to speak softly but firmly. "We're in our 40s, and we don't even have the means to save for a house of our own." "Let's not start this conversation again." Raúl pushed back the unfinished dinner. "You know this isn't a good time for change." The evening chill gradually filled the yard, bringing with it the sense of jasmine from the neighbor's garden. Somewhere in the distance, dogs barked and the muffled sounds of passing cars came from the main street. "I just want us to have a future," Maritza said quietly as she gathered the dishes. "So we can plan for something more than just surviving from paycheck to paycheck." Raúl got up from the table, walked over to the lemon bush, and absent-mindedly touched its leaves. "We have a roof over our heads, food on the table. Many live worse." Maritza stared at her husband's back, feeling a familiar heaviness building up inside. Once they had dreamed of a home of their own, of children, of traveling. Now their conversations were increasingly centered on bills and her mother-in-law's displeasure. The sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn toward the wicket. Dolores Escalante, unannounced as always, entered the courtyard. Her dark dress and stern posture gave her the appearance of someone who had come with important business. "Raúl, my son," she said hello, deliberately ignoring her daughter-in-law. "I brought you your favorite pumpkin pie." Maritza silently continued clearing the table, trying not to show how hurt she was by this habitual neglect. Dolores walked past her as if she were a blank slate and set the pie on the table. "I heard you talking about moving," the mother-in-law said coldly, looking intently at her son. "I hope you don't let any nonsense cloud your judgment." Raúl shifted his gaze from his mother to his wife, clearly feeling uncomfortable. "Mom, we were just discussing possibilities, nothing concrete. At your age, it's time to think about stability, not phantom dreams." Dolores pursed her lips. "By the way, I've arranged for you to get a part-time job at my friend Consuela's store. You'll be helping with the repairs on weekends." Maritza clutched the plates in her hands so hard that her knuckles turned white. She knew it was useless to argue. Raúl never contradicted his mother. Even now he only nodded, accepting a decision that had to be discussed with his wife. "It's getting dark," Maritza said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to get ready for my shift at the hospital tomorrow." She retreated into the house, leaving her husband and mother-in-law in the yard. Through the kitchen window she could hear their muffled voices, Dolores explaining something fervently to her son, and the latter occasionally answering one-wordedly. In the small bedroom, Maritza sat on the edge of the bed, looking at her hands, the hands of a nurse accustomed to hard work and the constant care of others. She felt cornered like a bird in a too-tight cage. Years of marriage had taught her to be silent and patient, but inside her was a growing realization that she couldn't go on like this. It was finally dark outside the window. Maritza mechanically made up the bed and spread the folds of the sheet. Tomorrow would be a new day, a new shift at the hospital, and she would have to find the strength to face it with her head held high. But now, in the quiet of the bedroom, she allowed herself a few moments of weakness, looking at the old photograph on the dresser where she and Raúl, young and happy, had stood by the lemon bush on their wedding day. The hospital corridor greeted Maritza with the familiar smell of antiseptic and the muffled hum of voices. 6 a.m. was shift change time at San Miguel de Allende City Hospital. She walked down the long corridor, her white uniform rustling slightly as she moved, her comfortable medical shoes treading silently on the worn linoleum. The night shift was winding down, and the tired nurses were handing off to the morning shift. Maritza pushed open the door of the nurses' station, where her friend Rosita Mendez was already stacking patient charts. "Good morning," Rosita said hello, lifting her eyes from the papers. "You're early today." "Didn't sleep." Maritza opened her locker, pulled out her badge and pinned it to her uniform. "How was the night shift?" "In Ward 3, Old Man Romero had another fever. In the 5th newcomer is a male after appendicitis. Otherwise, no incidents." Rosita held out some cards to her. "You're on the right wing today." Maritza nodded, running her eyes over the records. The right wing was the oldest wing in the hospital. Shabby walls, creaky gurneys, perpetually leaking faucets. But the patients here were mostly regulars, familiar, like old neighbors. "Are you okay?" Rosita looked at her friend carefully. "You look exhausted." Maritza crouched on the edge of her chair, machine smoothing a crease in her uniform. "Dolores came by again yesterday. Now she got Raúl a part-time job without even asking us." "That woman will never change," Rosita shook her head. "It's been so many years and she's still trying to control your life." Their conversation was interrupted by a call from the ward. Maritza stood up, fixed her hair, and headed for the door. "Talk to you later during lunch?" The day at the hospital stretched slowly, filled with the usual chores, taking temperatures, dispensing medication, changing IVs, dressings. In room 3, Old Man Romero told her about his grandchildren while she changed the linens. In room 5, a new post-op patient demanded constant attention, complaining of pain and an uncomfortable pillow. By noon, the sun was scorching the hospital walls, and even the old air conditioner in the hallway couldn't handle the stuffiness. Maritza was wiping sweat from her forehead, shifting medications in the treatment room cabinet when there was a knock on the door. "Lunchtime," Rosita announced, holding up 2 plastic containers. "I brought an extra serving of chili, knowing you'd forget to eat again." They settled into a small break room with a shabby table and 2 chairs. The window overlooked the hospital courtyard, where several patients in gowns strolled slowly under the supervision of nurses. "Remember Consuela, my mother-in-law's friend?" Maritza asked, stirring sugar into the cheap hospital coffee. "She opened a store on the main street and now Raúl will work there on weekends." The same store where everything is overpriced, Rosita snorted. And how much is she going to charge? I don't even know. They decided everything without me. Maritza set her spoon aside. You know, sometimes I feel like I'm just a shadow in my own house. Dolores comes in every day, giving directions, making decisions, and Raul just goes along with it. A young intern peeked into the room. Senora Escalante, there is a patient in room 7 asking for anesthesia. Maritza rose, adjusting her uniform with a familiar motion. Sorry, Rosita, duty calls. The day continued at its usual pace. Maritza moved through the corridors like a ship through familiar waters, confident and calm. Here, in the hospital, she felt needed. Here she was listened to. Her opinion had weight. Her work was valued. After lunch, a new patient was brought in, an elderly woman with a hip fracture. While Maritza helped to get her settled in the room, the woman held her hand tightly and tearfully told her about her dog, who was left home alone. Don't worry, Senora Paz, Maritza reassured her. I'll call your daughter. She'll be sure to take care of the dog. By the end of the shift, her legs were buzzing with fatigue. Maritza sat in the nurse's station, filling out the last of the charts. Rosita had already left. She had a short shift. It was starting to get dark outside the window, and the hospital corridors were slowly sinking into evening silence. Do you need a ride home? One of the nurses asked, gathering her things. My husband is picking me up in his car tonight. Maritza shook her head. Thanks, but I'd rather walk. Need to clear my head. She changed into her usual clothes, a simple dress and comfortable shoes. In her bag was an unfinished lunch from Rosita and a couple of headache pills. Maritza usually took the bus home, but today she didn't want to get home too quickly. Exiting the hospital, she turned down a side street that led toward home. The evening air was filled with the smells of roasted corn from a nearby diner and the blooming bougainvillea that hung over the fences of private homes. Maritza walked slowly, looking at the familiar houses and stores. Here was the bakery where she and Raul had once bought sweet rolls on Sundays. There's the old church where they were married. It was all so familiar and yet so foreign, like the setting for a play in which she was playing a part that was not her own. The street lamps were lit on the main street, illuminating the few passers-by and the closing stores. Somewhere in the distance, music was playing, probably at the bar on the corner. Maritza stopped in front of a jewelry store window, staring at her reflection in the glass. A tired face, gray strands in her dark hair, wrinkles in the corners of her eyes. She and Raul had once dreamed that he would buy her a gold ring here for their 10th wedding anniversary. It had been 15 years, but the ring was still a dream. Consuela's store loomed ahead, the new sign shining brightly in the dusk. Maritza quickened her pace, not wanting to linger near the place. Now, Raul would be spending his weekends here instead of at home with her. The street was gradually emptying. Lights flickered on in the houses, silhouettes of people gathering for dinner. Maritza imagined Raul sitting at home alone, or more likely in the company of his mother. Perhaps they were discussing her again, making plans for his life without asking her opinion. She turned onto her street when she heard the roar of the engine of an approaching car. The sound was unusually loud for their quiet neighborhood. Maritza pressed herself against the wall of the house, letting the car pass. But what happened next changed the course of her life forever. A black car with tinted windows was speeding down the narrow street at far too high a speed. Its headlights caught the cracked walls of houses and sparse bougainvillea bushes in the darkness. Maritza involuntarily retreated deeper into the shadows when suddenly a small boy ran out from around a corner chasing a ball. The squeal of brakes broke the evening silence. The driver swerved the steering wheel, trying to avoid hitting the child. The car swerved, hit the curb, and crashed at full speed into a lamppost. The sound of the impact echoed down the street. The windshield shattered and the driver's body flew through it, falling to the pavement. Maritza reacted instantly. Years of hospital work had taught her to act quickly in critical situations. She rushed to the lying man, pulling out her cell phone and dialing the ambulance number as she went. "Dispatch here. Accident on Los Pinos Street, in front of Building 23. Victim unconscious, multiple injuries. Need immediate medical attention," Maritza spoke clearly, kneeling down next to the victim. The man was lying on his side, his expensive suit torn and stained with blood. Maritza gingerly checked his pulse. Weak, but steady. She noticed a deep cut on his forehead and several small wounds from shards of glass. "Senor, can you hear me?" Maritza spoke loud and clear, checking pupil response with the flashlight in her phone. The man groaned and slowly opened his eyes. His gaze was hazy, but gradually focused on Maritza's face. "Don't try to move," she warned, noticing his attempt to move. "You may have damage to your spine and internal organs. An ambulance is on its way." People began to gather around. Someone brought a blanket, someone offered water. Maritza firmly shooed the curious away, creating space around the injured man for the medics to work. "How?" "Boy," the man said with difficulty. "He's fine," Maritza reassured him, noticing his lips beginning to turn blue. "You saved his life." She undid his tie and the top buttons of his shirt to ease his breathing. A gold chain with a locket engraved with the name Ernesto glittered around the man's neck. A siren wail could be heard in the distance. Maritza continued to monitor the injured man's condition, noting every change. His breathing was becoming shallower, and his skin was turning an ashy hue, signs of developing shock. The ambulance showed up 5 minutes later. Maritza quickly relayed the patient's condition to the arriving paramedics. Male, approximately 45 years old, head trauma, possible internal injuries, loss of consciousness for about 2 minutes followed by disorientation, signs of traumatic shock. As the medics prepared the stretcher and IV, she noticed a leather briefcase tumbling out of the wrecked car. Maritza picked it up and saw a business card falling out of a side pocket. "Ernesto Alvarado, CEO. Are you going with him?" One of the paramedics asked, noticing how professionally she acted. "Yes, I work as a nurse at the city hospital." Maritza climbed into the ambulance. She held the injured man's hand the whole way, monitoring his pulse and speaking soothingly to him as he regained consciousness. A medical team met them at the emergency room. Ernesto was immediately taken to the operating room while Maritza was left to fill out the necessary paperwork. Her hands were stained with blood and her dress was hopelessly ruined, but she thought only about the patient's condition. An hour later, the doctor on duty came to her. "Senora Escalante, the patient is stable. Multiple contusions, concussion, 2 broken ribs, but he will live. You saved his life with your quick reaction." Maritza finally allowed herself to exhale. She glanced at her watch. It was almost 10 o'clock at night. Raul must have been worried. She pulled out her phone and saw 5 missed calls from her husband. In the hospital restroom, she tried to clean herself up. She washed her face, scrubbed the bloodstains from her hands, brushed her tangled hair. The mirror reflected her gaunt face with dark circles under her eyes. When she left the hospital, she caught a cab, the first time in years. She usually saved for such expenses. All the way home, she replayed the events of the evening in her head. How one moment could change a person's life, and not just one, but several. Raul was waiting for her on the front porch. Seeing the state of her clothes, he jumped up. "What happened? Why didn't you answer the phone?" Maritza sank down tiredly on an old chair by the entrance and told her husband what had happened. As she spoke, a strange expression flashed in his eyes, a mixture of worry and something else she couldn't quite make out. "This Alvarado, is he rich?" Raul asked suddenly when she had finished her story. Maritza looked at her husband in surprise. "What does it matter? The man almost died." Of course, Raoul hastily agreed. It's just, that car, that suit. He must be a big shot. Maritza stood up silently and went into the house. She was too tired to argue or explain anything to her husband. All she wanted to do now was shower and go to bed. But she knew this night had changed something in her life, though she didn't yet realize what it was. In the bedroom, she hung the ruined dress carefully. Maybe she could get the stains out. As she lay in bed, she could still hear the screech of brakes and the sound of breaking glass. In front of her eyes was Ernesto's face, pale, bloody, but retaining even in the moment of pain some special nobility. As she fell asleep, she thought that she would check his condition first thing tomorrow. After all, it was her duty as a nurse, and for some reason the thought brought her a strange comfort. The morning sun was barely breaking through the blinds in room 8 when Maritza entered to check the IV. Ernesto Alvarado lay with his eyes closed, his face pale against the white hospital pillow. The bruises and abrasions from the accident had taken on a dark purple hue, but the swelling had gone down a bit. "Good morning, Senor Alvarado," Maritza said quietly, checking the instrument readings. Ernesto opened his eyes and smiled weakly. "Just call me Ernesto, and thank you for yesterday." Maritza methodically wrote down the readings on the chart. "You're welcome. It's my duty as a nurse." "No, you did much more than that." Ernesto tried to raise himself, but wrinkled in pain. "You stayed with me, talked to me. I remember your voice. It kept me conscious." At that moment, Rosita entered the room with a tray containing the hospital breakfast, liquid oatmeal, applesauce, and herbal tea. "How is our patient?" she asked, setting the dishes on the bedside table. "Vitals are stable," Maritza replied. "Temperature's normal. Blood pressure's a little elevated, but that's expected after the trauma." As Rosita walked out, Ernesto looked at the oatmeal in disgust. "Isn't there anything more edible?" "It is good for your recovery," Maritza said sternly, but a spark of understanding flashed in her eyes. "Though I confess I'm not a big fan of hospital food myself." She helped him up and placed a pillow under his back. That simple movement made his face contort in pain. The broken ribs were making themselves known. "Tell me about yourself," Ernesto asked, slowly stirring the cooling oatmeal. "How long have you worked here?" 15 years. Maritza checked the bandages on his wounds. "Since I got married and moved to this town." 15 years in the same hospital is dedication, Ernesto remarked. "People rarely stay that long in one place these days." There was no condescension in his voice, only genuine interest. Maritza felt she could speak frankly to him. "This is my home here, my job. The pay may be small, but I know I'm making a difference." The days at the hospital flowed slowly. Maritza often went to Ernesto's room not only to perform medical procedures, but also just to talk. He proved to be an attentive listener and an interesting conversationalist. He talked about his work in the capital, about traveling the world, about the books he was reading. "You know," he said one day as Maritza was changing the bandage on his head, "in big cities people have lost the ability to really communicate. They're all running around in a hurry. Here it's like time flows differently." Maritza smiled. "Many people think that life stops in small towns, but it doesn't. We just live at a different pace." One morning as she walked past the ward, she heard loud voices. Looking inside, she saw Dolores, her mother-in-law, talking animatedly with Ernesto about something. "Oh, Maritza," Dolores turned to her with an unnatural smile. "I heard that our humble hospital is treating such an important patient, so I thought I'd pay a courtesy visit." Maritza noticed Ernesto tense up. "Senor Alvarado needs rest," she said firmly. "The doctors have recommended limiting his visits." Of course. Dolores rose, ruffling her best dress. "I won't disturb you. Get well, Senor Alvarado." As she left, Ernesto looked questioningly at Maritza. "Your mother-in-law, I presume?" Maritza nodded, adjusting her IV. She's a very outgoing woman. And very persistent, Ernesto remarked dryly. In 15 minutes she had time to tell me about all the investment opportunities in your city and what a wonderful son she has. Maritza remained silent, but her cheeks flushed slightly with embarrassment. She concentrated on checking the readings on the instruments, trying not to meet her patient's gaze. You know, Ernesto said softly, sometimes the closest people can be the strangers. That simple remark made Maritza look up. In his gaze she saw understanding and sympathy that made her eyes water. That evening, after her shift, she lingered in Ernesto's room. Outside the window, dusk was fading, and the smell of orange blossoms from the hospital garden lingered in the air. "How did you end up in our town?" she asked, taking a seat on the edge of the chair. "Business." He shrugged and wrinkled his shoulders in pain. "Was only going to spend one day here. Planned to meet with potential partners, but fate took a different course. That boy," Maritza remembered. "You saved his life." Anyone would have done the same. Ernesto looked thoughtfully out the window. "You know what's strange? I don't regret the accident. Sometimes you have to stop to see something important." Footsteps were heard in the hallway. It was the evening shift of nurses delivering medications. "I have to go," Maritza rose. "You have follow-up tests tomorrow." "Maritza," Ernesto called out to her when she was already at the door. "Thank you for everything." She nodded and walked out into the hallway. On her way out, she bumped into Rosita. "You're late tonight," her friend remarked. "Raul won't be worried? He's at Consuela's part-time job." Maritza pulled her bag from her locker. "He often stays late now." Rosita looked at her friend carefully. "Are you okay? You've been kind of different." "Just tired," Maritza smiled, strained. "Lots of work." But it wasn't just the tiredness. Talking to Ernesto had made her look at her life with different eyes. His genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings, his respectful attitude, all of it reminded her of what she had been deprived of in her own home. Leaving the hospital, she walked slowly through the evening streets. The air smelled of jasmine and fried flatbread from the neighboring taqueria. Somewhere in the distance a guitar was playing and the first stars were lighting up in the sky. The day of Ernesto Alvarado's discharge was unusually hot. The hospital courtyard, usually filled with patients taking their morning walks, was empty. Even the hardiest of the hardy had chosen to stay in the cool of the wards. Maritza walked down the corridor, holding a folder of discharge papers. The heels of her white shoes beat a steady rhythm on the linoleum, echoing in the empty corridor. In room 8, Ernesto was already dressed in the fresh suit his driver had brought. His broken ribs still made themselves felt when he made sudden movements, but overall his condition was much improved. He was standing at the window, looking out over the hospital courtyard, when Maritza entered the room. "All the paperwork is ready," she said, trying to keep her voice sounding professional. "You'll need to take antibiotics for another week and be sure to see your doctor in the capital." Ernesto turned to her and his gaze lingered on her face longer than usual. "You know, this hospital has taught me a lot. Here I've seen that real care doesn't depend on the amount of money or modern equipment." Maritza lowered her eyes, pretending to check her paperwork entries. In the month she'd spent in the hospital, Ernesto had become someone more than just a patient to her. Their conversations, his attentiveness, his respect for her opinion, it had created a special bond between them that she was afraid to break with a careless word. "Your car is waiting out front," she pronounced, holding out the paperwork to him. "Wait." Ernesto pulled an envelope from his briefcase. "I want to thank you not only as a nurse, but as the man who saved my life." Maritza shook her head. "That's not necessary. I was just doing my duty." Ernesto accepted the flowers with sincere gratitude. "Tell everyone my thanks, especially to you, Rosita, for your morning jokes and the most delicious herbal tea." As Rosita walked out, Ernesto turned to Maritza again. Do you know what struck me most? I have met more humanity in this little hospital than I have in all my years in the expensive clinics of the capital. They went down to the first floor. A black car with tinted windows was waiting at the entrance, not the one that had crashed in the accident, but just as representative. The driver opened the back door. Goodbye, Maritza. Ernesto extended his hand to her. Don't forget that you deserve the best. She shook his hand, feeling a traitorous pinch in her eyes. Have a safe journey, Senor Alvarado. Take care. The car moved off smoothly, leaving behind a cloud of dust. Maritza stood at the entrance until the car disappeared around the corner. The envelope in the pocket of her uniform seemed unusually heavy. In the evening, when she returned home, she found Raúl watching television. A soccer game was on the screen, empty beer bottles standing on the coffee table. How was your day? She asked, walking into the kitchen. Fine, Raúl replied, not taking his eyes off the screen. Mom came by and brought enchiladas. Maritza began heating dinner, mechanically rearranging the dishes. The envelope was burning the pocket of her bag, but she decided to hold off on the conversation until a more appropriate time. After dinner, when Raúl finally pulled himself away from the TV, she pulled out the envelope. Remember the patient who was in the accident? He was discharged today. Raúl instantly perked up. So? He left this. Maritza placed the envelope on the table. As a token of gratitude, Raúl grabbed the envelope and opened it. His eyes widened at the contents. There's a fortune in here. I think we could put this money aside, Maritza began cautiously. Maybe for the future, for the children. Yes, of course, Raúl agreed hastily, but his eyes glittered strangely. I'll hide them somewhere safe. He rose from the table, clutching the envelope in his hand. I'll go put them in a hiding place. Not a word of this to anyone, not even Mom. Maritza nodded, feeling strangely uneasy. Something in her husband's behavior alarmed her, but she couldn't figure out what it was. At night, she couldn't sleep for a long time. Raúl was long asleep, his breathing deep and even. Maritza lay staring at the ceiling and thought about Ernesto's words. You deserve better. What did he mean? And why did those words hurt her so deeply? She thought about how her life had changed over this month. Talking to Ernesto had opened some door in her that she didn't even know existed. Now it was hard for her to go back to her old life, where she was just a shadow, unnoticeable, silent, always yielding. In the morning, getting ready for work, she noticed that Raúl had dressed especially carefully, even though his clothes would still get dirty in the cement at the construction site. Do you have a big day today? She asked, pouring coffee. No, just nothing, he replied, avoiding her gaze. By the way, I'm going to be late today. There's a lot of work to do. Maritza remained silent. She felt that something new was beginning, something inevitable, like an impending thunderstorm. But she did not yet know what that storm would be, or what destruction it would bring to their lives. It was a week after Ernesto's discharge. The hospital returned to its normal rhythm, but for Maritza, everything was different. She noticed details she hadn't seen before. How the paint on the walls in the hallway had aged, how the floorboards creaked at the nurse's station, how the old air conditioner in the emergency room breathed heavily. That morning she came to work earlier than usual. She hadn't slept well the night before. Raúl had come home past midnight, smelling of alcohol and some unfamiliar perfume. When she asked, he mumbled something about being late for work and went straight to bed. You look tired, Rosita remarked, meeting her in the locker room. Is everything okay? Maritza smiled, strained. Just haven't gotten much sleep. A lot of work lately. It's not just that. Rosita held the locker room door open. Ever since Senor Alvarado checked out, you haven't been yourself. I'm just used to taking care of him. Maritza buttoned the buttons on her uniform. It's normal to miss the patients you get attached to. Rosita shook her head but said nothing. She knew her friend too well to realize there was something else Maritza wasn't talking about. The day stretched on slowly. At lunchtime, Maritza went down to the hospital canteen. Usually she brought food from home, but this morning there was no time to cook. The line moved slowly and she heard the conversation between the two orderlies ahead of her. "Did you see him at the jewelry store yesterday?" one was saying. "With someone so young, in a red dress." "Yeah, and his wife probably has no idea," the other replied. "Though everyone already knows. The whole town is talking." Maritza tensed, but continued to pretend to study the menu on the wall. San Miguel de Allende was a small town where everyone knew each other. Gossip traveled fast, like circles on water. That evening she decided to check the envelope with the money. After Ernesto Raúl had been discharged, he had hidden it in an old safe in the pantry. He always carried the key with him, but the spare was in a cookie tin on the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet. Maritza waited until her husband left for his evening part-time job and opened the safe. It was empty inside. No envelope, no money, just old documents and a few faded photographs. She sank slowly to the floor of the storeroom. The dim light of a street lamp reflected in the small window. Somewhere in the house a clock was ticking, counting down the minutes of her shattering life. The ringing of the doorbell made her flinch. On the threshold stood Dolores, impeccably dressed as always despite the late hour. "Is Raúl home?" she asked, walking uninvited into the living room. "No, he's at work," Maritza replied, closing the pantry door. Dolores looked around the room with a fastidious glance. "At work? At a time like this?" "Oh yes, he's helping Consuela now." There was something odd in her voice, a kind of naivete that made Maritza wary. "Have a seat, Dolores," she suggested. "Would you like some coffee?" "No, thank you," the mother-in-law pressed her lips together. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Maritza felt a chill run down her spine. Why would anything be wrong? "Oh, well, people say different things." Dolores waved her hand carelessly. "Especially after your rich patient left. Left a generous gift, I hear." So Raúl had told his mother about the money. Of course, he couldn't keep it a secret even for a week. "Yes, Señor Alvarado was very grateful for the concern," Maritza replied cautiously. "Grateful?" Dolores grinned. "Of course, you know how to dispose rich men." Maritza straightened. "What do you mean?" "Nothing much, dear." The mother-in-law stood up. "Just be careful. Sometimes money can spoil a man." When Dolores left, Maritza stood at the window for a long time. The street lights were turning on outside. The neighbors were coming home from work. An ordinary evening in a small town where everyone knows each other, where secrets are kept behind tightly drawn curtains and the truth is hidden in unspoken words. The next day a neighbor, Senora Hernandez, stopped her at the gate. "Maritza, honey," she began, nervously rubbing her apron. "I have something to tell you. Yesterday I saw Raúl." "Where?" Maritza asked, even though she already knew the answer. "At the new restaurant on the square," the neighbor lowered her eyes. "He wasn't alone. With a woman. Young. Beautiful. They were sitting in a corner, and he gave her something. A box with a bow." Maritza nodded slowly. All the pieces of the mosaic were beginning to fit together. The late returns, the smell of perfume, the missing money, Dolores's strange behavior. At the hospital she worked mechanically, like a robot. She handed out medicine, gave injections, changed bandages. But something dark and heavy was growing inside her, something like a storm cloud. "Maybe it's not what you think," Rosita tried to reassure her during lunch. "People often jump to conclusions." "No, it's exactly like that," Maritza replied quietly. "I just didn't want to see it." That evening she called the jewelry store where Raúl had been rumored to have been seen. The young saleswoman eagerly shared the information. Yes, Senor Escalante had been there last week. He bought a gold bracelet with a ruby. Very expensive. Paid in cash. Now Maritza knew where the money in the envelope had gone. The money that was supposed to go towards their future, the children they had once dreamed of. Raoul had spent it on another woman, a young and beautiful woman, one who wore a red dress and expensive perfume. In the bedroom, she opened the closet and pulled out her best blouse, the one she wore on holidays. It was missing a button, and she'd been meaning to sew it on for months. It was such a small thing, but now it seemed to symbolize her whole life, unfinished, in need of repair, hanging on by her word of honor. Maritza walked down the main street of San Miguel de Allende, holding her shopping bag. It was evening, and one by one the store windows were lit with warm light. There was a damp stuffiness in the air. The rainy season was approaching. She stopped at a stoplight, absent-mindedly watching the passing cars, when a familiar silhouette in the window of the new La Palma restaurant caught her eye. Raoul was sitting at a table by the window. He was wearing a new shirt. Maritza had never seen it before. Across from him sat a young woman in a red dress with a deep neckline. Her black hair was arranged in an elaborate style, and a gold piece of jewelry glittered around her neck. They were talking animatedly, and the woman touched Raoul's arm, throwing her head back in a feigned laugh. Maritza froze in place. Passers-by hurried past. Someone even shoved her shoulder, but she didn't move, couldn't take her eyes off the scene. Raoul took a small velvet box out of his pocket and handed it to his companion. She opened it and splashed her hands with joy as something shone brightly in the light of the restaurant lamps. The bag slipped from Maritza's weakened fingers. The oranges rolled down the sidewalk, one reaching the road and being crushed by a passing car. The pungent citrus odor mingled with the exhaust fumes. "Senora Escalante?" a familiar voice called out to her. It was Doña Mercedes, the owner of the grocery store. "Are you feeling ill?" Maritza slowly bent over, beginning to pick up the scattered groceries. Her hands were shaking, but she methodically put the purchases back into her bag, trying not to look in the direction of the restaurant. "Let me help." Doña Mercedes knelt down beside her, picking up the tomatoes that had rolled away. "You look so pale." "Thanks, I'll manage." Maritza's voice sounded muffled, as if from far away. "Just tired after my shift." Rising, she cast one last glance at the restaurant window. Raoul and his companion were still sitting there, immersed in their own world, where there was no room for a faithful wife and 15 years of life together. Maritza took a roundabout way home, avoiding the crowded streets. Her heels thudded on the cracked asphalt, echoing off the old walls. Her mind reeled with scraps of thoughts. Raoul's new shirt, the glint of the jewelry in the velvet box, the money from Ernesto's envelope, the red dress, the stranger's laughter. At home, the first thing she did was go to the bathroom. For a long time she looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror. A tired face, wrinkles in the corners of her eyes, gray strands in her dark hair. Her nurse's uniform dress hung baggy on her. She had lost weight in the last few weeks, but she hadn't even noticed it. In the kitchen, she mechanically sorted through her purchases. The crushed tomatoes went into a bowl. She would have to make a sauce out of them. She put the remaining oranges in a vase, 3 instead of the 6 she'd bought. She started to peel potatoes for dinner, but cut her finger. A red drop fell on the cutting board, splattering on the wood. The ringing of the phone caught her off guard. It was Rosita. "You left so quickly after your shift today." Her friend's voice sounded concerned. "Is everything okay?" "I saw him, Rosita," Maritza said quietly. "In the restaurant, with her." A heavy pause hung on the other end of the line. "He gave her a piece of jewelry," Maritza continued. "Probably with that money, Ernesto's money." "Shall I come?" Rosita asked. "No, don't." Maritza looked at her cut finger. "I have to figure this out on my own." After talking, she went out into the yard. An old lemon bush cast whimsical shadows on the cracked slabs of the walkway. She and Raoul had once sat here in the evenings, dreaming of the future, making plans. Now the courtyard seemed an alien, hostile place. The radio was playing in the next house, an old song about love and betrayal. Maritza sank down on a plastic chair, the same one Raoul used to sit on. The scene in the restaurant came back before her eyes. The red dress, the glitter of the jewelry, the happy laughter. She didn't know how long she sat like that in the dark. The sounds of the city gradually faded away. Only the cicadas continued their endless song. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, answered by another. The smell of jasmine from the neighbor's garden hung in the air, heavy, stuffy, like all the secrets of this small town. The creak of the wicket gate made her wince. Dolores stood on the threshold, her dark figure clearly outlined against the streetlight. "What are you doing here in the dark?" The mother-in-law's voice sounded suspicious. "Why aren't the lights on?" Maritza didn't answer. She continued to sit motionless, looking somewhere over Dolores's shoulder. "I brought the groceries." Her mother-in-law walked past her into the kitchen. "Raoul said he'd be late today. Lots of work at Consuela's store." Consuela's store, of course. Now it was called work, sitting in an expensive restaurant with a young woman in a red dress, giving her jewelry bought with someone else's money. "You know," Dolores returned to the courtyard, "men do stupid things sometimes, but it's important to keep your dignity, not to make a scene." Maritza slowly turned her head toward her mother-in-law. "Did you know?" Dolores tightened her lips. "What do you mean?" "About the woman in the red dress." Maritza's voice sounded surprisingly calm. "About the jewelry he's giving her. About where Ernesto's money went." "That's none of my business," Dolores retorted. "And it's none of yours either. The important thing is to keep the family together." "Family?" Maritza finally rose from her chair. "What family, Dolores? The one where the husband spends money on a mistress, where the mother-in-law covers up her son's infidelities." "Don't you dare talk to me that way." Dolores raised her voice. "You should be grateful that Raoul married you at all. A simple nurse, no money, no connections." Maritza raised her hand, stopping this torrent of words. "Go away, Dolores. Just go away." When her mother-in-law finally left, slamming the gate, Maritza returned to the house. In the kitchen there were still some unpeeled potatoes and sliced tomatoes. On the table was the basket of food Dolores had brought, as if food could replace honesty and respect. Maritza pulled out of the cupboard an old tin can where she kept her savings, the little money she set aside from each paycheck. Maybe the day would come when she would need it. That day seemed to come sooner than she expected. The morning was unusually sweltering. Maritza woke early. She had hardly slept at all during the night, listening for footsteps outside, waiting for Raoul to return. He came in the morning, smelling of expensive perfume and wine. Without even a glance in her direction, he had collapsed on the bed in his clothes and fallen asleep instantly. Now, she was standing in the kitchen, mechanically stirring coffee in a cup. Raoul's new shirt, tossed carelessly on the back of a chair, caught her eye. Fine cotton, perfect stitching, the kind of thing you couldn't buy in the stores in their neighborhood. There was a lipstick mark on the collar. There was a knock at the door. It was Senora Valencia, their neighbor on the left. A small, full woman with kind eyes. She lived alone and knew all the news in the neighborhood. "Maritza, dear," she squeezed through the doorway. "I brought you some fresh tamales. There's something I need to tell you." They settled down at the kitchen table. Senora Valencia nervously rubbed the edge of her apron, avoiding looking Maritza in the eye. "I saw them together," she said at last. "Raoul and that Carmela. She works at the beauty parlor on the square. They've been dating for months." Maritza clutched her coffee cup. "Carmela?" "Yes, Carmela Ortiz. She is 32 years old. She recently moved from the capital. Senora Valencia lowered her voice. They say she's been married before, twice. The name finally took shape. Carmela Ortiz, the woman in the red dress, the lover of expensive jewelry, the destroyer of families. Also, the neighbor leaned closer. I heard Dolores talking to her at church. She called her darling. Maritza rose slowly from the table, walked to the window where pots of wilting geraniums stood on the sill. She had forgotten to water the flowers yesterday, and now their leaves wilted, as did her hopes for a happy married life. Thank you, Senora Valencia. Her voice sounded distant. I have to get ready for work. After her neighbor left, Maritza went upstairs to the bedroom. Raúl was still asleep, sprawled out on the bed. She opened the closet and began methodically going through his things. New shirts, expensive pants, a leather belt from a well-known brand all recently arrived. In the pocket of one of his jackets, she found a crumpled receipt from a jewelry store. The amount listed there was huge. In the bathroom, rummaging through the dirty laundry basket, she found another shirt with lipstick marks, this time on the cuff. In the trash was a crumpled receipt from La Palma, a bill for 2 people, including a bottle of expensive wine. Going down to the kitchen, Maritza pulled out her phone and opened social media. It wasn't hard to find Carmela Ortiz's profile. She liked to take pictures and share details of her life. Here she is at the beauty salon. Here she is at a new restaurant. Here she is with her friends. One of the last photos showed a gold bracelet with a ruby, the same one that Raúl had bought with Ernesto's money. Maritza was so absorbed in her research that she didn't notice Raúl enter the kitchen. His wrinkled face expressed displeasure. "Why didn't you wake me up?" he muttered, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "I'm late for work." "What work, Raúl?" Maritza asked quietly. "To a construction site or Consuela's store? Or maybe to Carmela's beauty parlor?" The cup in his hands shook, some coffee spilling onto the countertop. "What kind of nonsense are you talking about?" His voice sounded uncertain. Maritza placed the receipt from the jewelry store on the table. "Where did you get the money for such gifts, Raúl? Where is the envelope Ernesto left? Are you following me?" He tried to go on the offensive. "Going through my things? And you're spending the money set aside for our future on a mistress." Maritza stood up. "And your mother knows about it, helps you, covers for you." Raúl turned pale. "It's not what you think." "No?" Maritza opened Carmela's profile on her phone. "Then explain to me how she got the bracelet you bought with Ernesto's money. Explain why you smell like her perfume, why there are lipstick marks on your shirts." At that moment, the front door opened. Dolores stood on the threshold. She froze, assessing the situation. "What's going on here?" Her voice sounded commanding. "Your son," Maritza turned to her mother-in-law, "spent all the money Ernesto left behind on gifts for his mistress, and you knew about it, helped him to meet her." "Don't be silly," Dolores retorted. "Raúl is just helping the poor woman get back on her feet. She has a hard fate." "A poor woman?" Maritza grinned bitterly. "Who wears designer dresses and dines at expensive restaurants? Who brags on the internet about gifts from a married man?" Dolores turned purple. "How dare you? After all we've done for you, adopted you into a family, given you a roof over your head." "A roof over your head?" Maritza stepped close to her mother-in-law. "I worked tirelessly for 15 years, keeping this house, cooking, doing laundry, putting up with your nagging. And all this time you've been waiting for the moment to replace me with someone more suitable?" "Mom, don't," Raúl tried to interject, but Dolores waved him away. "Yes, waiting," she reprimanded, "because you were never worthy of my son, a mere nurse with no ambition, no future." "And Carmela is worthy then?" Maritza shook her head. "A twice-divorced hunter of other men's husbands. At least she knows how to treat a man." Dolores smiled triumphantly. "Unlike you, She knows how to be a woman, not just a nurse. Maritza walked silently to her bag, pulling out a shabby envelope. In it lay Ernesto's business card, the one with his personal phone number. You know what? She turned to Raoul and his mother. You're right. I'm really just a nurse. But I'm an honest nurse, and I'm not going to take it anymore. With those words, she walked out of the house, leaving a heavy silence behind her. It was beginning to rain outside, the first rain of the season. The drops fell on the dusty leaves of the lemon bush, washing away the dirt of the past and promising a new beginning. Evening descended on San Miguel de Allende like a heavy blanket. Maritza walked slowly home after her shift at the hospital, each step difficult. All day she worked like an automaton, dispensing medicine, giving injections, changing bandages. Even Rosita noticed her condition and tried to make her go home early, but Maritza refused. Work was the only thing keeping her upright. The house greeted her with an unaccustomed liveliness. A light was on in the kitchen and voices could be heard. Opening the door with her key, Maritza saw Raoul and Dolores sitting at the table. In front of them were plates of unfinished dinner and a bottle of wine. Ah, there you are, Dolores pursed her lips. We've already eaten dinner. Didn't wait for you. Maritza walked silently into the kitchen, setting her bag on a chair. The smell of Raoul's favorite dish, chili con carne, wafted through the air. Of course, Dolores had prepared it on purpose, knowing her son couldn't resist the dish. We need to talk, Maritza turned to her husband and mother-in-law, about Ernesto's money, about Carmela, about everything. Raoul fidgeted in his chair, but Dolores put a hand on his shoulder, reassuring him. What's there to talk about? The son is just helping out a good acquaintance. You're exaggerating everything. A good friend? That money belongs to Raoul as much as it does to you, parried the mother-in-law. He has the right to dispose of it as he wishes. No, this money was given to us for the future. Maritza leaned her hands on the table. For our future together, for the children we dreamed of. Do you remember, Raoul? Or have you already forgotten that, planning a future with Carmela? Raoul jumped up from his chair, knocking over his wine glass. The red liquid spread across the white tablecloth, resembling blood. Enough! He shouted. You don't understand anything. Carmela, she's different. She's young. She's beautiful. She's fun. And you, all you think about is work, money, the future. Maritza felt something inside her finally snap. Of course I think about the future. Someone has to think about it while you're spending our savings on a mistress. Don't you dare talk to my son like that. Dolores stepped between them. You should be grateful he married you at all. A simple nurse, no dowry, no connections. Yes, I am a simple nurse. Maritza straightened to her full height. But I am an honest nurse. I don't steal other people's husbands. I don't lie. I don't betray. At that moment, the front door swung open. Carmela stood on the threshold, tall, slender, in a tight red dress. Her appearance was like a blow under the breath. Oh, is this a bad time? She smiled, showing perfect white teeth. On her wrist glittered the very same ruby bracelet. No, come in, dear, Dolores fussed. We're just having dinner. Join us. Maritza watched Carmela walk gracefully to the table, sit down in her seat, the seat where she'd sat for 15 years, as Dolores bustled around her, putting food on her plate. Get out of here, Raoul suddenly shouted, turning to Maritza. Get out. You've ruined everything with your suspicions, your jealousy. Carmela was calmly spreading butter on a tortilla, as if what was happening didn't concern her. Dolores stood beside her with a triumphant smile on her face. Maritza slowly picked up her bag. Her hand fumbled in her pocket for Ernesto's business card, the only link to possible salvation. She looked at the picture, her husband yelling at her, her mistress taking her place, her mother-in-law finally getting what she'd wanted all these years. You know what? She said quietly but firmly. You're all worth each other. Liars, traitors, thieves. How dare you? Dolores gasped with indignation. I dare, Maritza headed for the door, because I have nothing more to lose. You've already taken everything from me. My husband, my home, my dignity. But you know what? I will find a way to get back what is rightfully mine. She walked out into the night, leaving Raoul's screams and Carmela's soothing voice behind her. The rain had intensified, but Maritza hardly noticed it. A plan was already forming in her mind. A plan for the revenge that was to come. The rain drummed on the tin canopy of the bus stop where Maritza tried to take shelter from the weather. Her uniform dress was soaked through, her hair sticking to her face. Her bag contained a few personal belongings, documents, and Ernesto's business card, her only hope for justice. The phone in her pocket vibrated. It was Rosita calling. Maritza didn't answer right away, gathering her strength. Where are you? Her friend's voice sounded worried. I called your house. Some woman picked up the phone. Carmela, Maritza answered quietly. She's living in my house now, sits at my desk, sleeps in my bed. Come to me, Rosita said firmly. At once. I'm sending a cab for you. 20 minutes later, Maritza was sitting in Rosita's kitchen wrapped in a warm plaid. Steam was rising from a cup of hot tea, mingling with the smell of freshly baked corn tortillas. Now tell me about it. Rosita sat down across from him, placing her phone in front of her. All in order. Maritza began to speak. Told about Ernesto's money, about Raoul's new things, about the ruby bracelet, about Dolores bringing Carmela into their house, sitting at the table as if she had the right to do so. Raoul shouting, "Get out of here!" So Dolores knew everything, Rosita shook her head. I always said that woman was a snake. At that moment there was a knock at the door. Senora Valencia stood on the threshold. Behind her loomed the figure of Donna Mercedes from the grocery store. We saw you run out of the house, Senora Valencia squeezed through the door. And then this. That woman went in there like she was at home. The whole neighborhood is buzzing, Donna Mercedes added, placing a basket of groceries on the table. Such a disgrace. And Dolores is good, too. She herself brought a mistress into her son's house. Maritza sat in silence, listening to the neighbors discuss what had happened. Their sincere indignation warmed her soul a little, but could not change the main point. She had lost everything. Did you know, Donna Mercedes lowered her voice, that Carmela has already bragged on social media? Posted a picture from your house, wrote something about new life and well-deserved happiness. Rosita grabbed her phone and quickly found Carmela's profile. Indeed, there was a new post, a picture of a table set, the same one where Maritza had had breakfast with her husband of 15 years. The caption read, "Things are finally falling into place. Thank you to my new family for the warm welcome." This is too much, Rosita exclaimed. Something has to be done. Maritza pulled Ernesto's business card out of her bag. The golden letters gleamed dimly in the light of the lamp. I know what to do. She straightened the crumpled card. Ernesto said I could go to him for help. Well, I guess the time has come. She dialed the number on the business card. After the third dial tone, a familiar voice answered, Ernesto Alvarado speaking. Senor Alvarado, Maritza tried to speak calmly. This is Maritza Escalante, a nurse from the San Miguel de Allende Hospital. Maritza! A sincere warmth was heard in his voice. I knew you would call. What happened? She began to tell about how Raoul had spent money on a mistress, how Dolores had brought her into the house, how she had been thrown out of her own dwelling. Ernesto listened in silence, only occasionally asking clarifying questions. I'm on the next flight out, he said when she finished. Be ready in 2 hours. And don't worry, we'll fix it. While they waited for Ernesto to arrive, the neighbors continued to arrive. Donna Lupita from across the street came, then Senora Morales and her husband. Each brought something: Food, clothes, words of encouragement. Rosita's small kitchen became the headquarters of the resistance. "You know," said Doña Lupita, spreading photos on the table, "my niece works at the beauty parlor with Carmela. She says she bragged that she was about to own a house on our street. That was a month ago. And I saw Dolores taking her shopping," Senora Morales added, "buying her clothes, jewelry. She kept saying, 'My son needs a real woman.'" As Maritza listened to these stories, not only pain but determination grew inside her. She remembered Ernesto's words that she deserved better. She hadn't realized their meaning at the time, but now. There was another knock at the door. This time it was the young girl from the beauty parlor, the same niece of Donna Lupita. "Senora Escalante," she handed Maritza an envelope. "Carmela kept this in her locker. I thought you should see it." The envelope contained letters. Love letters from Raúl, dated months ago. Future plans, promises of divorce, talk of a life together. And worst of all, mentions of Ernesto's money, which they planned to spend on a new life. "There's more," the girl pulled out her cell phone. "I have recordings of their conversations at the salon. Carmela wasn't shy about discussing all this in front of clients." Maritza listened to the tapes, and every word hit like a slap in the face. Carmela boasted of her victory, told how easy it had been to seduce Raúl, how Dolores herself had offered to take her place as his wife. Around midnight, Ernesto arrived. His expensive suit was soaked with rain, but his posture was impeccable. He listened to all the evidence, looked over the documents and records. "We have enough evidence," he said at last. "Tomorrow morning we will put an end to this. For now, rest, Maritza. You'll need your strength." The morning was overcast. There was an unusual bustle in Rosita's house as neighbors came and went, bringing new information about what was going on in Maritza's house. She herself was sitting at the kitchen table, mechanically stirring the cooled coffee. Ernesto sat across from her, his laptop open and a stack of documents lying next to him. "Carmela already had time to change the locks," Doña Mercedes reported, flying into the kitchen. "Saw the locksmith leave an hour ago, and Dolores is running around the house like a hostess, hanging new curtains." Maritza gripped the cup tighter. New curtains. Of course. Dolores had always hated those plain white curtains Maritza had hung 15 years ago. "It doesn't matter." Ernesto looked up from his laptop. "I have some good news. I've been in touch with the local police chief. He's an old friend of mine. We went to school together. He's on his way." At that moment, Doña Lupita's niece entered the kitchen, still in her beauty parlor work uniform. "Carmela just called to say she's not coming into work today. She's going to do some remodeling on the house." "My house," Maritza corrected quietly. On the table in front of her were documents, a marriage certificate, a purchase agreement for the house, old utility receipts all in her name. Ernesto was typing something quickly on his laptop. His fingers flew over the keyboard and his face expressed concentration. Rosita brought fresh coffee and a plate of enchiladas, but no one touched their food. "Here's what I was able to find out," Ernesto finally said. "Carmela Ortiz has a rich history. 2 divorces, debts, several lawsuits from former employers. She didn't come to San Miguel de Allende by accident. She's got major troubles in the capital." He unfolded the laptop screen, showing the documents. "Here are the police reports. Here are the court decisions. She's a professional hunter of other people's money. And Raúl isn't the first married man she's cheated." "But how did she meet Dolores?" Rosita asked, placing a fresh cup of coffee in front of Ernesto. "That's the most interesting part." Ernesto opened a new file. "It turns out they met at the church. Carmela went there on purpose, knowing Dolores was an active member of the parish. She gained her trust, told a heartwarming story about her hard life, and Dolores, who had always wanted to get rid of her sister-in-law, saw her chance." Maritza listened, and every word echoed with pain in her heart. All these years, Her mother-in-law had been waiting for the moment to replace her, and Carmela had turned out to be the perfect instrument. Now for the most important part, Ernesto pulled another folder from his briefcase. Remember the money I left behind? I specifically labeled all the bills, and what's interesting is that some of that money turned up at the jewelry store where Raul bought gifts for Carmela, and that's fraud. There was a knock at the door. It was the police chief, a full man in uniform with a neatly trimmed mustache. "Captain Romero," he introduced himself. "Ernesto has already briefed me. We're ready to proceed." The next hour passed discussing details. Captain Romero scrutinized the documents, made notes, asked questions. He was particularly interested in the recordings of conversations from the beauty parlor, where Carmela had openly discussed her plans. "You know," he said, closing his notebook, "normally we don't interfere in family affairs, but there's clear fraud, theft, maybe even extortion here. We have enough grounds for an arrest." "Arrest?" Marita looked up. "But I don't want to arrest anyone. I just want my home and my life back." "That's exactly what we'll do." Ernesto put a hand on her shoulder. "But they need to realize that the law is on your side." By noon, the plan was ready. Captain Romero called for 2 police officers to accompany them. Ernesto pulled out some paperwork that required immediate signatures. "Here's what we're going to do." He spread the papers out on the table. "Now we're going to drive to your house. I have documents proving that the money I gave you was an earmarked loan for a specific purpose. Using them to buy jewelry for a mistress is fraud. Either Raul signs a waiver of all rights to the house and property, or he goes to jail." Marita stared at the documents, at the policeman, at Ernesto's determined face. It all seemed unreal, like a dream. Just yesterday, she had been homeless, betrayed, humiliated. And today, "Let's go." She got up from the table. "I want to end this once and for all." They left Rosita's house in a large group. Marita, Ernesto, Captain Romero and his officers, Rosita and a few neighbors who refused to stay away. The day was overcast, but the rain had stopped, as if even the weather had decided to uphold justice. A small crowd had already gathered outside the house. People were whispering, pointing to the new curtains in the windows, to Carmela's expensive car parked out front. Marita walked at the head of the procession, her head held high. Ernesto walked beside her, his presence giving her strength. Captain Romero went to the door and knocked loudly. There was some fumbling inside, then the sound of footsteps. The door was opened by Dolores. "What's all this?" She tried to slam the door shut, but the police officer deftly placed his foot in the opening. "It means it's time for justice to be done," Ernesto said firmly, stepping forward. "Invite Raul and Carmela in. We need to talk." Dolores tried to block the doorway with her body, but Captain Romero firmly dismissed her. The policeman entered first, followed by Ernesto and Marita. The house smelled of fresh paint and foreign perfume. On the walls were new paintings that Carmela had apparently brought with her. Raul jumped out of the kitchen, wearing the same new shirt, now wrinkled from the night before. Carmela appeared behind him, tightening the waistband of her silk robe, the same one Marita kept in her closet for special occasions. "What's going on here?" Raul tried to put confidence in his voice, but his trembling hands gave him away. "You have no right to break into a private home." "This is my home," Marita replied calmly, "and I have all the documents to prove it." Captain Romero placed a folder of papers on the table. "We have evidence of fraud, theft, and misuse of borrowed funds. Senor Escalante, you spent money that was given by Senor Alvarado under certain conditions." Carmela dashed toward the stairs, but the officer blocked her path. The ill-fated ruby bracelet still glittered on her wrist. "And you, Senorita Ortiz," continued the captain, "have a rich history of similar situations in the capital. 3 unpaid lawsuits, charges of fraud, unpaid debts. Dolores, who until that moment had been standing leaning against the wall, suddenly exploded. "It's all lies. Carmela is a decent woman. She loves my son." "Really?" Ernesto pulled another folder out of his briefcase. "Then explain these documents. Bank statements showing how money with my markings ended up in jewelry store accounts. Recordings of conversations from the beauty salon where Senorita Ortiz details her plan to take over other people's property." Carmela turned pale, her manicured fingers gripping the staircase railing. "This is slander. I'm going to sue." "No, you won't," Ernesto replied calmly. "Because then all your past deeds will come out. And believe me, the judge will be very interested in why you fled the capital, leaving behind so many debts." Raúl shifted a confused look from Carmela to his mother, then to Marita. I don't understand." "You understand everything." Marita walked over to the sideboard and opened the top drawer. There, among the napkins, lay the deeds to the house. "You knew you were spending other people's money, knew you were betraying me, and your mother knew. You all knew." A heavy silence hung in the room. Outside the window, a crowd of neighbors had gathered. The whole block had come to see the denouement of the story. Sunlight streamed through Dolores's new curtains, highlighting the specks of dust in the air. "You have a choice." Captain Romero placed 2 documents on the table. "Either you, Senor Escalante, sign a waiver of all rights to the house and property in favor of your lawfully wedded wife, or we open a criminal investigation. And believe me, given the circumstances, the courts will not be on your side." Carmela was the first to realize the hopelessness of the situation. She rushed to the front door, but the police were on guard. One of the officers politely but firmly brought her back into the room. "Raúl!" she shrieked. "Do something!" But Raúl stood with his shoulders slumped, his face covered with sweat. He stared at the papers on the table, at the police officers, at his mother's angry face, at Marita's calm one. "Yeah, I'll sign," he finally said in a hoarse voice. "No." Dolores rushed to her son. "You can't. This is our home, our family." "This is my home," Marita said firmly, "and has been for 15 years. Now sign the papers, Raúl, and pack your things." The next half hour passed in tense silence. Raúl, hands trembling, signed the papers waiving all rights to the house and property. Carmela paced around the room, trying to gather her belongings scattered throughout the house. Dolores sat in a chair, moving her lips soundlessly. "Now," Captain Romero said, after making sure all the paperwork was in order, "you have 1 hour to leave the house, all 3 of you." "1 hour?" Dolores resented. "But we have so much stuff." "You can only take what belongs to you personally," replied Ernesto. "Everything else is Senora Escalante's property." Marita stood at the window, watching her now ex-husband, his mother, and his mistress hastily gather their belongings. Carmela took off Marita's robe and threw it on the floor. Dolores tried to remove the new curtains, but a policeman stopped her. "Raúl," Marita called out as he walked by with a suitcase. "The bracelet." Carmela instinctively grabbed her wrist where a ruby glittered. "It was purchased with Señor Alvarado's money," Captain Romero explained. "Therefore, it is physical evidence of fraud." With tears in her eyes, Carmela undid the bracelet and tossed it on the table. Raúl didn't even glance in her direction. He had already realized he was the victim of a skilled con artist. "The bus to the capital leaves in 2 hours," one of the officers reported. "We'll make sure you catch it." Finally, all the belongings were packed. Dolores took one last look around the house she considered her territory. Raúl, slouching, dragged the suitcases. Carmela, already without makeup or jewelry, looked much older than her 32 years. "Goodbye, Raúl," Marita said quietly. "I hope you find what you're looking for." A whole crowd had gathered in the street. The neighbors parted silently, forming a corridor through which the three exiles walked. Some of the women crossed themselves. Others shook their heads. Children pointed their fingers at Carmela, who just yesterday had been bragging about her victory on social media. As the police car took Raúl, Dolores, and Carmela away, Marita finally let herself sink into the old chair. Her hands were shaking, but her head was clear. "It's over," Rosita said, taking a seat next to her. "No," Marita shook her head. "It's just beginning." Ernesto stood at the window, watching the neighbors disperse. His presence gave the room an air of solidity, as if justice itself had decided to linger here for a while. "What are you going to do now?" he asked, turning to Marita. She looked around the room. The signs of the stranger's presence were everywhere. New curtains, strange pictures, forgotten lipstick on the table. But underneath it all, it was still her home, holding 15 years of her life. "I'll clean all this up first," she stood up. "And then I'll start living again." The sun was already slipping toward dusk, its rays coloring the walls in warm tones. In the kitchen, Rosita was rattling dishes, making coffee. In the garden, an old lemon bush cast a long shadow over the cracked slabs of the path. Everything was the same as before, and everything was completely different.